The quiet town of Millwood was bathed in the fading light of dusk, the sun dipping below the horizon as long shadows stretched across the empty streets. 6 friends, Jake, Emily, Ryan, Sarah, Mike, and Lisa, piled into Jake's old SUV, laughter and loud music filling the air. They were headed to a weekend cabin in the woods, a much-needed escape before finals. But what started as a fun getaway quickly turned into a nightmare none of them could have imagined. The road ahead was dark and winding, the kind where the headlights barely cut through the thick fog. Jake gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Emily sat in the passenger seat, glancing at him nervously. She didn't like how fast he was going, but she stayed quiet, not wanting to ruin the mood. "Hey, slow down, man," Ryan called from the back seat, his voice tense. "You're gonna get us killed." Jake laughed, but it was shaky. "Relax, dude. I've got this under control." But he didn't. As they rounded a sharp curve, the headlights caught something in the road. A massive tree trunk, fallen and blocking their path. Jake slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the SUV skidded out of control. Time seemed to slow as the vehicle flipped, rolling over and over before crashing into a ditch. When the dust settled, the friends were alive, but barely. Jake was unconscious, blood trickling down his forehead. Emily screamed, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Ryan groaned, clutching his ribs. Sarah, Mike, and Lisa were bruised and shaken, but otherwise unharmed. They crawled out of the wreckage, their bodies aching and their minds racing. The road was deserted, no cars in sight. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. They were miles from anywhere, with no cell service and no way to call for help. "We need to get to the cabin," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's not far. We can make it." The others nodded, too scared to argue. They started walking, their footsteps echoing in the silence. But as they moved deeper into the woods, strange things began to happen. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. "Do you guys feel that?" Lisa whispered, her eyes darting around. "It's like something's watching us." No one answered. They were too afraid to admit they felt it too. When they finally reached the cabin, it was a relief. It was old and creaky, but it was shelter. They barricaded themselves inside, locking the doors and windows. But as the night wore on, the feeling of dread only grew stronger. It started with small things, a flickering light, a strange noise outside. Then the visions began. One by one, they saw glimpses of their own deaths, vivid and horrifying. Jake saw himself impaled on a broken branch. Emily saw herself drowning in the lake. Ryan saw himself crushed under a falling tree. Sarah, Mike, and Lisa saw their own gruesome fates, each more terrifying than the last. "It's like death is coming for us," Mike said, his voice shaking. "And there's no way to stop it." They tried to stay together, to protect each other, but one by one, they began to die, just as they had seen in their visions. Jake was the first, his body found impaled on a branch outside the cabin. Emily was next, her lifeless body pulled from the lake. Ryan was crushed under a tree that fell in the middle of the night. By morning, only Sarah, Mike, and Lisa were left. They were hysterical, their minds unraveling as they tried to make sense of what was happening. They decided to leave the cabin, to run as far as they could. But as they stepped outside, they saw it. A figure standing in the shadows, its face hidden, but its presence unmistakable. It was death. Sarah screamed, turning to run, but it was too late. The ground beneath her gave way, and she fell into a hidden pit, her body impaled on sharpened stakes. Mike tried to fight, swinging a piece of wood at the figure, but it was no use. The wood shattered, and Mike was consumed by flames, his screams echoing through the woods. Lisa was the last one standing. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she begged. "I don't want to die." But death showed no mercy. As Lisa closed her eyes, waiting for the end, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. And then, nothing. When the authorities finally found the cabin, they were baffled. The bodies of the 6 friends were scattered around the property, each one killed in a bizarre and inexplicable way. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence of an intruder. It was as if death itself had come for them. The case was never solved, and the cabin was eventually abandoned, left to rot in the woods. But locals say that if you visit the cabin at night, you can still hear the screams of the 6 friends, their voices carried on the wind. And if you're unlucky enough to see a figure standing in the shadows, you'd better run, because once death has its eyes on you, there's no escape.